in the quiet stillness of the far north, under a sky painted with a gentle transition between night and morning, where no clear sunrise marks the boundary. A soft rustling stirs from within a small Inuit tent, shaped by arched whalebones and covered tightly with sealskin to block the wind's endless whisper. Inside, the air is still and heavy, with the comforting warmth of body heat and the faint, smoky residue of last night's seal oil lamp. Blankets of caribou hide press snugly against the sleeping bodies of a family whose lives follow the rhythm of ice and tide, not clocks or calendars. And as the eldest member begins to stir, a grandmother with skin weathered like driftwood and hair braided with care, even in sleep, she pulls her thick sleeve over her mouth and breathes into it slowly, warming her face before rising. Her motions are deliberate and unhurried, her thoughts not in a rush to greet the day. For here in this place, time drifts like snow, silent and slow. One by one, others begin to wake, the father rubbing his eyes, checking that the ice blocks at the back haven't thawed too much overnight, the mother gently coaxing the smallest child to sit up, brushing frost-kissed hair out of his face, and two older boys stretching their limbs and whispering quietly to each other, their breath visible in the dim interior like tiny clouds. The scent of the night, a mixture of skin, old wood, oiled fur, and frozen air, lingers in the tent as a lantern is finally lit, casting a soft glow that dances over the curved bones above, creating shadows that seem to sway like northern lights, captured in miniature. Outside, the world is muted, blanketed in snow that crunches only beneath deliberate feet, and the soft sound of cracking ice echoes faintly in the distance, as if the earth itself is sighing. The grandmother steps out first, her boots carefully bound in seal hide, and squints against the white, adjusting her hood while her eyes scan the familiar scene. Snow-dusted tools leaning against a rack of fish, drying stiffly in the air, a dog sled sitting patiently under a light dusting of frost, and a faint trail of footprints leading to the ice hole that had been carved out days ago and faithfully maintained ever since. She breathes in deeply, not to smell, for scent is muted in the cold, but to feel the air fill her chest the way only winter air can, sharp and oddly comforting. Behind her, the family begins to emerge in layers, moving slowly, not from laziness, but from tradition, for there is no sense in rushing in a place where nature does not rush either. A simple breakfast is begun, bits of aged fish, a sip of warm broth from a shared bowl, nothing extravagant, only what is needed. There is no chatter, just the quiet acceptance of another day beginning as it always does, just as it has for generations. In the camp, the snow reflects the sky in shades of white and gray-blue, the only movement being the distant figures of other families in similar shelters, also beginning their day in the same rhythm. The cold does not bite here. It simply exists, a presence like another member of the community as the camp stirs gently to life, with no alarms, no shouts, no sudden lights, just the soft, slow awakening of those who have always lived alongside the cold and the quiet. The day unfolds, not in events, but in moments, and those moments, strung together with calm intention, form the tapestry of yet another ordinary, beautiful day in the Inuit fishing camp, where nothing exciting happens, and that is precisely the point. The soft hum of the wind brushing across the snow-covered plains becomes a steady companion as the family begins their morning preparations, not hurriedly, but with the same quiet rhythm that has been passed down through generations, like the carving of a bone hook or the careful stitching of a waterproof boot. The father, tall and broad-shouldered, beneath layers of furs and softened sealskin, stands near the lean-to made of driftwood and compact snow, where their tools are kept bundled in place with sinew cord, his breath visible in the frozen air as he unties the knots slowly, mindful not to snap the stiffened twine that had frozen slightly overnight. Each movement is part of a routine that needs no discussion. Hands know where to go, what to reach for, and when to wait, as the tools of ice fishing are brought out one by one. The curved bone-tipped spear, the hand-drilled auger made from a repurposed iron rod, and the ice chisel that gleams dully in the light of the low-hanging sun, which never quite rises but offers just enough illumination to distinguish the white snow from the pale skies. Beside him, the older son kneels to inspect the fishing lines, running his gloved fingers carefully along the twisted fibers to check for frays, while his younger brother kneels by a pouch of hooks carved from walrus tusk, counting them aloud in a whisper more for the ritual of it than for necessity. Inside the tent, the mother prepares a small package of dried seal meat and fish to be taken to the fishing site, folding it neatly in a square of oiled hide that resists the wetness of contact with snow. And she adds 2 small cups, carved from bone for warm broth later in the day, tucking them into the bundle with the kind of gentle care that makes even this small act feel sacred. The grandmother is mending a hole in one of the mittens with sinew thread and a small bone needle, her fingers deft and calm, eyes squinting, not with frustration, but with focus, her posture stooped slightly, yet steady, the embodiment of patience in motion. A sled is prepared slowly, layer by layer. First, the wooden runners, checked and scraped clean of built-up frost. Then the cargo, carefully loaded to distribute weight evenly, with every pouch, spear, and coil of rope in its proper place, not for perfectionism, but for balance, so nothing shifts during travel. The dogs, who have already sensed the morning's purpose, begin to stir from their beds, carved into snowbanks, their thick fur crusted slightly with ice crystals that melt as they rise and stretch, tails wagging in quiet arcs that stir the powdery snow without sound. One of the boys offers each dog a small frozen scrap of meat, watching as they accept it, politely crunching through the cold protein with a sense of satisfied routine. They are not pets, but partners, and they know their work will soon begin. No one speaks much, and there is no need to. The sounds of boots pressing into snow, of rope being pulled taut, and of soft breaths in the cold are a language of their own. The family moves like a single unit, slowly and without rush, each person knowing their part, from tying knots to adjusting hoods, from checking sled bindings to patting the dogs with quiet affection. The sun hovers low in the sky, never climbing, casting a gentle silver wash across the land that makes the snow shimmer like fine dust, and the cold, though intense, does not feel cruel. Rather, it is a part of the landscape, as familiar as the mountain ridge in the distance, or the worn trail that leads to the fishing site. By the time they are ready, the sled is packed, the dogs are alert, and the father gives a single nod, not a command, but a signal that all is as it should be. The family begins their short journey across the snow, the sled gliding softly behind them, the crunch of boots, the only sound that rises above the wind. They travel not for adventure, not for excitement, but for the continuation of life as it has always been, quiet, methodical, and entirely in rhythm with the cold and the land. The landscape unfolds before them in endless shades of white and pale gray, with no sharp edges and no clear landmarks except the gently rolling snowdrifts and the familiar indentation of an old trail packed smooth by years of passage. And as the family sets off on their slow journey toward the ice hole, the sled glides behind them with a whisper of friction, its runners singing softly across the frozen crust of the tundra, the kind of sound so subtle it could be mistaken for the wind's breath. And perhaps it is, for here everything blends together: the air, the land, the people, the past, all moving in the same slow cadence under a sun that hovers like a memory rather than a promise. The father walks ahead, guiding the way not with haste or urgency, but with the confident patience of someone who has made this same trek hundreds of times, his boots pressing deep into the snow, his fur-lined hood catching flakes of wind-blown frost that gather along the edges like frost feathers. Behind him, the boys take turns walking and occasionally riding the sled, though neither option is easier than the other, and their breath puffs steadily in front of them in little white clouds that linger and drift before fading. The mother walks beside the sled for a time, checking now and then to make sure the bundled tools haven't shifted, occasionally adjusting a strap or retucking a corner of hide, not because anything is wrong, but because the act itself is comforting, a quiet participation in the rhythm of the journey. The dogs lead with calm discipline, their bodies moving low to the ground, their muscles working in quiet synchronicity, ears twitching now and then at distant sounds, perhaps the groan of distant ice expanding, or the faint bark of another team far off, though nothing ever comes close enough to see. There is no conversation, only a steady silence that feels full rather than empty, as though the land itself were whispering old stories in a language made of snowflakes and drifting wind. Occasionally, one of the children points out a mark in the snow, a narrow trail left by an Arctic fox, or the subtle scoop of snow that shows where a ptarmigan once rested. And though no one comments, each member of the family sees it and acknowledges it with a quiet glance or a slight nod, for these signs are familiar, almost like greetings from the land itself. The terrain begins to shift slightly, not in dramatic hills or valleys, but in long, slow dips and barely noticeable rises, and the father adjusts course just a bit, angling toward a cluster of snow mounds where the ice beneath is known to be thick and reliable. Time here is measured not in minutes or hours, but in the distance between familiar features, the slope of a drift that has always leaned to the left, or the shape of a rock half buried in snow that looks like a sleeping seal. Eventually, they reach the place, marked by a barely visible post of whalebone and a circle of packed snow that betrays the work of many days and many hands. The ice hole, neatly carved and rimmed with hardened snow, still glistens faintly with thin layers of fresh ice that formed overnight, and the surface around it is smooth and quiet, undisturbed except by the faint paw prints of a curious animal that had visited during the night, likely sniffing at the edges before moving on. The father approaches first, kneeling carefully beside the hole, using a small chisel to begin clearing the fresh ice, each motion steady, unhurried, the sound of the tool tapping lightly like a lullaby sung by the cold. The children unpack the tools, laying them out in a careful line. No one tells them what to do, and no reminders are needed, for they have done this often enough that their hands move automatically. The mother unrolls the food bundle nearby, not because it is time to eat, but because the ritual of preparing the space is part of the work, and she sets out the small bone cups and the packet of dried meat with the same care she would use if expecting honored guests. The dogs settle into small dips in the snow, circling once before, curling tightly into themselves, their breathing slow and steady. No one remarks on the cold, because it is not something to be overcome or fought. It is simply present, like the air or the sky, and they carry on within it, surrounded by the stillness of a land that has changed little over lifetimes. There is no drama here, no surprises, only the slow unfolding of another ordinary day, as the family prepares to fish beneath the ice, not for sport or wealth, but because this is what they do and have always done, quietly, steadily, and with great peace. With the space cleared and the gear neatly arranged beside the ice hole, the father leans forward, resting on one knee, his gloved hand brushing away the thin, newly formed ice from the edges of the hole with the back of his knuckles, revealing the still, dark water beneath, a world untouched by wind, sound, or sun, a hidden realm where fish move slowly through channels carved by centuries of thaw and freeze. He lowers a handmade line carefully into the hole, the hook carved from bone and baited with a small strip of preserved fish. And as the weight dips beneath the surface, the line unwinds with a faint, rhythmic pull, each loop released by fingers that have done this more times than can be counted. Around him, the others quietly take their places, his elder son setting up a second line just a few feet away, mimicking his father's method with practiced ease, while the younger boy sits cross-legged nearby, holding a smaller hand line and watching the water with intense focus, not because he expects something to happen quickly, but because he knows that patience is part of the process, as much a tool as the line or the hook. The mother, seated a short distance back, takes the time to clean and sharpen another spear, her motions smooth and slow, using a rough stone pulled from a leather pouch to gently refine the point, her eyes occasionally drifting to the hole as if by instinct. There is no chatter, no restlessness, only the sound of the wind brushing past and the occasional soft groan of the ice adjusting beneath their feet, a reminder of the vast, frozen body beneath them, breathing in its own slow way. From time to time, the tip of a line will twitch faintly, But not every movement means a catch. Sometimes it is the current. Sometimes it is nothing at all. And they do not rush to check, for haste has no reward here. The grandmother, who remained seated near the sled with a blanket pulled over her shoulders, slowly chews a piece of dried meat, gazing out at the white expanse beyond the fishing spot, her eyes soft and unfocused, as if watching a memory instead of the present. Occasionally, one of the dogs lifts its head, ears flicking in response to some distant sound, a shifting snowbank, a passing bird, but then settles again with a sigh, curling tighter into itself. The hours pass, without acknowledgement, without division, the sun barely moving in the sky, casting a constant gray light that makes time feel both frozen and fluid. The cold is ever present, but never cruel. It simply exists, shaping their every motion, dictating the pace, guiding the breath and the stillness. Eventually, the father feels a proper tug on the line, not a nibble or a drift, but a firm pulling motion that speaks of a fish beneath, real and resisting, and he braces his legs, wraps the line around his hand once, and begins to pull with steady, even force, not jerking, not yanking, just a patient, even rhythm that gives the fish its dignity, even as it rises. Bit by bit, the catch emerges from the dark, a modest Arctic char, its scales dull in the light, its movement sluggish. From the cold, he lays it gently on a flat rock nearby, where the mother quickly and cleanly dispatches it with a practiced hand, wrapping it in a cloth to keep it from freezing too quickly. There are no cheers, no applause, just a silent nod exchanged between them, a shared acknowledgement that this is enough, this is good. The lines are reset, the quiet continues, the world turns unnoticed beneath their feet, and the work goes on in calm, slow repetition. Each catch is handled with the same care and intention, not hoarded, but respected, and as the pile of wrapped fish slowly grows beside the mother's seat, the feeling is not of bounty but of balance, as if the ice has granted them just what they need, no more, no less. And so they sit, breathe, watch, wait, together in the cold, not resisting it, not wishing for more, only participating in the long, slow pattern of another day, shaped by patience, held in silence, and wrapped in snow. As the sun reaches its highest point in the sky, though high here is only a suggestion, for it lingers low and pale, casting a muted silver glow over the snow-covered expanse. The family remains gathered around the ice hole, lines still lowered into the dark water, tools still resting in neatly ordered rows beside them, their silhouettes gently blurring in the light snowfall that has begun to drift from the clouds like the soft dust of a long-forgotten sky, quiet and steady, falling without urgency or noise. The wind has softened, and for a moment, everything seems to still. Even the dogs, curled tightly into themselves, beside the sled, do not stir, their steady breaths rising as faint plumes in the cold air, blending with the smoke from the small, carefully shielded flame that the mother has coaxed to life, using a stone oil lamp and a handful of dry moss kept in a leather pouch. For this exact purpose, she shields the flickering light from the wind with her gloved hands as she warms a small pot balanced atop the lamp, the flame dancing gently beneath the container, heating a broth made from seal bones and dried herbs gathered long ago and stored carefully in an oiled skin satchel. The aroma rises slowly, barely perceptible in the cold, but comforting nonetheless. A reminder that sustenance, however simple, is never far. Around her, the family begins to shift slightly, not in haste, but in acknowledgement of the midday pause that has become a quiet tradition, a time not just to eat, but to breathe, to sit together and notice the silence that holds them like an old story retold every day. The boys reel in their lines and wrap them gently, laying them beside their boots before sitting cross-legged on the flattened snow that has been cleared with practiced efficiency. The father, after checking the lines one final time, kneels beside the pot and accepts a small carved cup of steaming broth from the mother, nodding once, his expression unreadable beneath layers of fur, but his movements full of appreciation. The grandmother receives her portion with the same solemnity, her cup cradled between gloved hands like something sacred, steam rising past her cheeks and disappearing into the air as she sips slowly, eyes closed, as if listening to something just beneath the surface of the stillness. The boys eat in silence, dipping dried fish into the broth and chewing slowly, not distracted, not hurried, simply present in the moment, their breath rising in tandem as they sit beside one another, legs nearly touching, backs curved slightly, like the gentle arches of the whalebones back home. No one speaks, and no one needs to, for in this moment, everything necessary has already been said through shared emotion, shared quiet, and the unspoken understanding that nothing here is wasted, neither words, nor food, nor warmth. The dogs are offered small portions as well, bits of dried meat tossed gently toward their resting forms, accepted with quiet gratitude and quick swallows before their heads lower again into the snow. Around them, the snowfall continues in a rhythm that almost resembles breathing, coating the sled's wooden frame and the extra tools laid beside it in a thin film of powder that no one brushes away, for the snow is as much a part of them as the clothes they wear or the ice they sit upon. The father sips from his cup and stares toward the distant horizon, where the line between sky and land is soft and uncertain, the colors blending in hues of white, gray, and soft blue. And for a moment, it feels as if time has paused, not stopped, not broken, but paused, held gently between one breath and the next and the next. The boys begin to hum softly, almost imperceptibly, a tune their grandmother once taught them, the notes drifting lazily into the air and vanishing as quickly as they form, not loud enough to disturb, only enough to remind them of stories carried by song. The mother hums along without looking up, her hands still wrapped around the now empty pot, her eyes reflecting the low light like stones wet with melting ice. They sit like that for a while, minutes, maybe more, maybe less, until the father stands and stretches, his breath coming out in a long, steady exhale, and the spell of stillness slowly dissolves into the soft creak of bones shifting, tools being gathered again, lines prepared once more, and the day, as it always does, quietly resumes its flow. No one remarks on the break or the taste of the broth, or the way the snow now clings to their clothing. They simply move forward, as they always do, in the quiet echo of generations who lived this same rhythm, beneath the same sky, beside the same cold water, in peace, in patience, and in perfect accord with the quiet language of the land. As the soft spell of midday begins to fade, the gentle warmth from the seal oil lamp slowly waning until only the memory of heat lingers in the air, the family rises again with that same measured cadence that defines every action here. No rush, no sudden shift, only the smooth continuation of a day paced not by the sun or clock, but by the needs of the land and the nature of the cold. The snowfall, which had settled into a near perfect stillness during their meal, now begins again with a slightly more persistent rhythm, flurries sweeping low across the ice, in long, slow streams like ribbons pulled across a great white drum, whispering against the fabric of coats and brushing past their cheeks with cold kisses that neither sting nor fade. The father returns to the edge of the ice hole and inspects the surface, brushing away the newest layer of frost with a swatch of fur tied to a stick, revealing once again the inky black beneath, a reminder that under all this frozen stillness, life continues to move in silence. He adjusts one of the fishing lines, his fingers careful and slow, the motion so practiced it's almost meditative, and nearby the elder son works on repairing the frayed edge of a net made from knotted sinew, tugging at the strands with quiet focus, his breath rising steadily into the air like a signal of patience. The younger son begins tracing circles in the snow with a stick, not out of boredom, but as a form of still play, drawing shapes that will soon vanish beneath the snowfall. As fleeting and harmless as a dream, the mother stands and walks a few paces away, her boots crunching softly in the snow as she surveys the sled and rechecks the bindings around the tools, pausing now and then to shake off the fresh accumulation from a pack or to run her hand gently along the back of one of the dogs, which stirs slightly and then settles once more with a low, contented sigh. The grandmother, meanwhile, remains seated with her back straight and eyes half-lidded, her hands resting on her knees, not asleep, but not entirely awake either, caught in the pleasant trance of repetition, memory, and wind. Around them, the landscape remains unchanged in its endlessness, the sky above still cloaked in that familiar gray that never brightens or darkens, and only the direction of the falling snow offers a clue to the passing time. Every so often, a bird might pass overhead, small, dark shapes that barely cast shadows but leave behind a fleeting flutter in the air, and each one is silently noted, not for any reason beyond the natural instinct to remain aware of the living world. Time moves differently here, not in sharp increments, but in soft passages, like the slow shift of snow along the edge of a tent flap or the creak of leather tightening in the cold. Another fish is caught, this small one, pulled gently from the water, its body glistening like polished stone, and the father handles it with care, passing it to his wife, who wraps it and places it among the others without a word. There is no tally kept, no quota to meet, only the rhythm of give and take with the ice, and the quiet agreement that enough is enough, and more will come another day. The boys begin to speak quietly now, their voices hushed and slow, trading fragments of stories they've heard many times before, of great hunts, of drifting icebergs taller than mountains, of times when the sea sang louder than the sky. And though their stories are simple, even childish, they carry a weight of belonging that roots them to this place more than any map or name ever could. The grandmother eventually joins in, adding her own murmured tale, not beginning at the start, nor ending at the finish, but somewhere in the middle, where all good stories seem to live. The wind picks up slightly, swirling the snow in low arcs that drift lazily across the ground, forming small dunes around the sled and along the edges of the ice hole. And the family instinctively begins to secure things a little tighter, not out of worry, but from habit, because here, a sudden gust or long flurry is not an emergency, only another part of the slow dialogue between land and people. As the afternoon stretches on, with more lines cast and more moments quietly passed, the ice holds steady beneath them, thick and unmoving, as though listening, as though welcoming the slow pace of this ordinary day, a day not marked by grand events or sharp turns, but by steady breath, soft voices, and the constant comfort of routine carried out in a landscape where nothing changes quickly and everything endures. As the faintest change in light begins to signal the slow approach of evening, not a golden sunset, nor a dramatic fall of darkness, but merely a deepening of gray in the sky and a subtle shift in the quality of the cold. The family continues their work around the ice hole with the same calm consistency, even as the air thickens slightly with the drifting snow and the horizon begins to blur into a seamless blend of cloud and land. The father, kneeling beside the hole, quietly checks the tension of the remaining line, his gloved hands steady as always, his eyes thoughtful but not strained, the way someone might appear while listening to a story they know by heart. Behind him, the boys have grown quieter, their earlier hums and whispers fading into a hush that matches the stillness of the world around them. And the younger one now sits with his knees drawn to his chest, chin resting on a thick mitten, watching the slow swirl of snowflakes with that specific kind of attention only children can give to things that move without purpose. The mother hums softly to herself while sharpening a small knife on a flat stone, her motions rhythmic and precise, not urgent, but necessary, keeping the edge of the blade keen against the hardness of frozen fish and sinew. The grandmother, wrapped in layers of fur and hide, leans forward slightly and begins to speak, not loudly, not even directly to anyone, but as if to the air itself, her voice low and even, flowing like a river beneath thick ice, telling an old story about her own grandmother who once fished in the same waters, sat beside the same kind of hole, and told her stories in this same wind-brushed cold. The words come slowly, with long pauses, and none of them are new, but that is what makes them precious. The retelling, the repetition, the anchoring of now to then through the simple act of remembering. The boys listen with the stillness of respect, their breathing matching the grandmother's gentle pace, and the mother does not stop her work but leans her head slightly in the direction of the voice, allowing the words to thread through the fabric of the moment like sinew through skin. The wind makes a soft sighing sound across the ice, brushing snow in thin waves over their boots and sled, and as the tale continues, the landscape seems to quiet in response, as though the land itself is listening to the voice of someone who remembers. The father, still holding the fishing line, gazes out toward the place where the ice meets the distant sea, his mind momentarily caught in the imagined memory of generations, men and women who wore similar furs, carried similar tools, and moved across this same snow with the same silent reverence. There is a power in remembering, not the kind that shouts or commands, but the kind that softens the air and steadies the hands. And in this moment, the entire camp is wrapped in that power as surely as they are wrapped in their clothes. No new fish bite, and no one minds, for the work has become secondary to the memory, and as the grandmother's story trails off into the fading light, no conclusion is needed. The story ends where the snow begins, unfinished and yet whole. The sled creaks faintly as the wind picks up again, and the dogs stir, one letting out a low groan before settling back into sleep. The mother rises and begins to pack away the smaller tools with practiced efficiency, brushing snow from each item before tucking it back into its bundle. The boys join her without being asked, rolling ropes and folding hides, their fingers red with cold, but moving without complaint. The grandmother remains seated, staring out at the pale sky with an expression that could be sadness or peace, or both. As is often the case with memory, the family prepares slowly for the return, not as a final act, but as part of the day's natural rhythm. And though nothing remarkable has occurred, and no great catch has been made, there is a feeling of fullness in the air, as though the day itself, in all its stillness, has offered something quiet and complete. As they move together through the softening snow, packing gear, and brushing down the dogs, the cold wraps around them, not like an enemy, but like a story, one that has no clear beginning and no urgent end, only the ongoing rhythm of breath, snow, and time, as the last fishing line is pulled from the dark water and gently coiled with care. The wind carries with it a subtle deepening of chill that suggests the evening will arrive soon, though the sky has not changed much, and the shadows fall without sharpness, only gradually lengthening across the snow in soft smudges of blue and gray that blend into one another like water seeping into fabric. The family moves in unspoken agreement, their motions slow and practiced as they pack the remaining tools onto the sled, bone hooks, fish wrapped in hide, the carefully folded net, and the lamp, now extinguished and cool, all placed in the same arrangement as always, not out of obligation, but because it is the way that makes sense, the way that feels settled and balanced after a long day of stillness and subtle work. The father secures the bindings across the sled, tugging once, then twice, making sure the knots hold firm against the rising wind, while the mother brushes snow from the blankets that had served as padding, her movements smooth and quiet. The boys check on the dogs, brushing light snow from their backs, patting their sides, tightening harnesses with hands made stiff from the cold but still gentle. Still certain, the grandmother stands last, slow to rise from her seated spot, but steady once upright, using a curved stick to steady herself as she gazes once more at the ice hole, now covered with a thin film of frost that has begun forming the moment the tools were pulled away, the surface already beginning to erase the day's efforts. With the graceful indifference of nature, the father signals with a nod, not a command, but an acknowledgement that all is ready, and the dogs begin to move forward with slow strength, their bodies leaning into the harnesses, paws crunching softly into the layered snow as the sled glides forward with a long, low groan that fades quickly into the wind. The family walks in a line beside and behind the sled, their boots tracing fresh prints over the ones made earlier, overlapping and blending into the wide, open trail that leads them home. The journey back is quiet, even quieter than the trip out, for the day's energy has been spent not in bursts or noise, but in the soft expenditure of constant presence, of shared effort, of breathing and doing without demand. The snowflakes fall more thickly now, not in a storm, but in a soft, steady hush that seems to lower the sky, enclosing them gently in a dome of moving white. And the only sounds are the familiar ones, the soft huff of dog breath, the creak of wood, the shifting of coats, and the low rustle of wind curling around fur-lined hoods. No one speaks, and no one needs to. The silence between them is full of understanding, of stories already told and work already done. The youngest boy walks close to his grandmother, holding her hand, not because she is unsteady, but because he likes the way her fingers feel wrapped in his, even through the gloves, even through the cold. The mother hums to herself again, barely audible over the wind, just a few notes of a lullaby once sung to her, and now recalled like a taste or a scent, soft and familiar. The father glances over his shoulder now and then to check on the sled, on the dogs, on the trail, not from worry, but from the instinct of a caretaker, always watching, always aware. The light dims further as they approach the outline of their home, a curved shape, nestled into the snow, part of the land, more than apart from it, and the smoke from the tiny vent at the roof's peak coils upward in lazy spirals, a sign that warmth is waiting, that rest is near. The grandmother is the first to smile, barely, just a soft tug at the corner of her mouth, and the others seem to feel it, even without seeing it, for their pace changes slightly, just enough to suggest that the idea of being home is now closer than the memory of the cold. As they reach the entrance, the dogs settle without command, forming into a resting pile once the sled halts, their work complete, their reward not a treat, but the return to stillness. The family unpacks slowly, lifting each bundle with care, shaking snow from the edges, placing each item just where it belongs, as they always do. The door flap is lifted, and inside, the gentle glow of the seal oil lamp flickers, casting soft, uneven shadows on the walls made of bone and hide, and the air within carries the scent of smoke, warmth, and something gently sweet, perhaps the memory of earlier broth or the comfort of being enclosed. Once more, they enter one by one, removing boots, loosening hoods, brushing snow from each other's backs, until the cold is left outside, and only the quiet remains, folding over them like the layers of caribou hide they'll soon wrap around themselves. Once more, nothing remarkable happened on the journey back, and yet everything about it mattered. The way snow fell, the way they walked, the way the world held them gently as they moved across it. And now, returned and whole, they sit in the silence of evening, surrounded by the snow, the memory of water, and the warmth of another quiet day well lived, inside the dim enclosure of the home, lit only by the soft and flickering glow of the seal oil lamp that casts golden light across the gently curved walls of tightly stretched hides and carefully fitted bone. The family settles into their evening routine with the same quiet assurance that shaped their morning. No sudden changes, no dramatic shifts, only the calm continuation of living with the land, with each other, and with the gentle weight of tradition. The space is small, but perfectly arranged, with everything in its place, not for decoration, but for purpose. Thick caribou hides stacked for bedding, tools stored in wall loops made of sinew, bowls carved from driftwood stacked by size, and a low platform for food preparation built from flat stones, warmed by proximity to the flame. The air inside is warmer than the outside, not hot, never truly warm by southern standards, but enough to soften the fingers and allow the stiffness of the cold to drift gently from bones and skin. The father removes his heavy outer layers slowly, shaking loose the lingering snowflakes and folding each piece with care before placing it near the door, allowing it to dry slightly without ever letting the warmth escape. The mother does the same, her motions unhurried, as she carefully unwraps the bundle of fish caught earlier, inspecting each one not for size or pride, but to ensure that it is properly preserved and can be cleaned later with the least waste. The boys sit near the lamp, their backs resting against the inner wall, sharing a single thick blanket across their legs, each of them holding a carved bone toy shaped like a seal, or a bird or a sled dog, moving them slowly across the floor as if reenacting the day in silence. The grandmother hums again, the same low, tuneless sound she always makes in the evenings. Not a song, but a rhythm of breath shaped into voice, a sound older than words and deeper than silence, something between a prayer and a memory. The lamp is tended frequently, the wick trimmed with a bone pin, and the reservoir refilled with a careful ladle of seal oil that releases a faint scent into the room, a smell of warmth and endurance, of food and fuel, and everything that keeps them alive in a place where so little grows and so much must be made by hand. The mother begins preparing a meal, though meal is perhaps too grand a word for what it is. A few slices of dried meat, softened in a shallow bowl of hot water, and a handful of berries preserved from last summer's fleeting abundance, mashed gently into a thick paste and shared in small cups, each portion measured not by fairness, but by need and appetite, with no one taking more than they should, and no one asking for less than they require. The father sharpens a knife on a stone that has been passed through many hands before his, the sound of stone on blade whispering through the air like the rustle of distant snow. The boys, now finished with their toys, are handed small tasks, one to stir the berries, the other to hang the day's mittens near the warmest spot in the tent, making sure they dry without hardening. No one complains, no one delays. Each person moves in quiet harmony, guided not by instruction, but by the soft pull of routine and belonging. The walls of the home shift slightly with the wind, not shaking but sighing, the structure breathing with the rhythm of the storm outside, which has picked up just enough to be noticed in the way it curls against the roof and nudges the entrance, flap, like an old friend checking in. They eat together in a circle, knees nearly touching, the food passed hand to hand with soft thanks spoken in brief glances more than words. The dogs, curled in snow dens just outside, let out the occasional low woof or huff of breath, their presence both background and protection. After the meal, the space grows quieter still, the work of the day done, and nothing more required except presence and stillness. The lamp's glow becomes steadier as the oil settles and burns cleanly, casting fewer shadows and more comfort. And in this light, faces soften, shoulders drop, and the sense of safety settles in like a second skin. The grandmother speaks again, this time a shorter story, one of a lost mitten and a clever fox, or perhaps a memory dressed up as a tale, and everyone listens without interruption, not because they expect a lesson, but because listening itself is part of being a family. The father leans back with his hands behind his head. The mother brushes a lock of hair from the younger boy's forehead, and the older one, eyes already half closed, leans into the warmth of his brother's side. The wind continues to blow, not fiercely, but steadily, a reminder of the world outside and the importance of the shelter they've made, the fire they've kept, and the ordinary day they've lived. Every day they've lived, there is nothing more to do and nothing left undone. The room holds them gently, the lamp hums with light, and the night prepares to take them softly into sleep as the evening settles deeper into the bones of the camp and the wind outside continues its slow, constant exhale over the snow-covered earth. The family begins to shift into the final rhythm of the day, not rushed or even consciously acknowledged, but simply felt in the body, the way fingers loosen from tasks, the way backs curve toward rest, the way eyelids become heavier, not all at once, but gradually, like a soft tide returning over frozen ground. The lamp burns lower now, its glow no longer casting wide circles of golden light, but instead resting in a quiet pool near the center of the space, flickering gently against the walls like a heartbeat slowed to a calm and steady rhythm. The air has cooled slightly, not from neglect, but because the day has ended and the body no longer needs as much warmth when sleep begins to weave its way through muscles and breath. The father reaches for the thickest of the caribou hides, soft from years of use and smelling faintly of earth and smoke, and carefully spreads it across the center of the floor, laying it over the packed snow and smooth stones with the care one might give a newborn child, gentle, precise, familiar. The boys take off their inner boots and set them carefully near the flap, knowing without being told how they must be arranged for the morning, and then crawl under the hide together, giggling once in a muffled way before settling into a shared silence that feels more like comfort than fatigue. The mother places a rolled piece of seal fur beneath each of their heads, not as pillows for softness, but for warmth and to keep their hair from freezing to the hides, a habit passed down through years of learning how to sleep in the cold without letting the cold inside. She then joins them, lying on her side, facing the children, her hands folded beneath her cheek, her eyes already closed, but her ears still gently tuned to the sounds of the room. Tiny breaths, the occasional shift of a limb, the whisper of the lamp's flame. The grandmother takes her place last, curling up slightly apart from the rest but still within reach, her knees tucked beneath her and her arms folded across her chest, wrapped in an older, darker fur that once belonged to her own mother. And the warmth it offers is not just physical, but emotional, ancestral. Outside, the dogs shift positions once more, pushing their noses deeper into their tails, burying themselves further into their snow beds, instinctively preparing for the long hours of rest, and their faint sighs and the crunch of snow as they move form the night's background music. Within the home, the silence becomes a presence in itself, not empty, not void, but full of the kind of stillness that holds the world in balance, where nothing is expected, nothing is asked, and everything is allowed to be exactly as it is. The father is the last to lie down, stretching out slowly and placing one arm across his chest, the other beneath his head, eyes open just a little longer than the others, gazing at the roof above, where the faintest outline of the whalebone ribs can still be seen in the low light, the shapes arching like frozen waves above their heads, holding them safe. He does not speak, nor does he think in words, only in feelings. The kind of tiredness that comes not from exertion, but from calm completion. The soft satisfaction of a day lived in step with the land and the people he loves. The lamp is allowed to burn lower, its reservoir nearly empty, the wick curling slightly as the flame begins its slow descent into darkness. And soon, only embers remain, faint orange glows that barely reach the far corners of the room, yet offer just enough light to reassure without disturbing. One by one, their breaths deepen and sink with one another, rising and falling like the waves they do not see but have heard stories about, the sea beyond the ice that moves even when they sleep, reminding them that the world is still turning, even in quiet. The walls no longer echo, they simply hold, and the cold outside wraps itself gently around the home, pressing against it, not like a threat, but like a blanket too heavy to lift. No dreams come quickly here. They drift slowly in, like the snow itself, settling gently over the edges of the mind until thought is replaced by peace, and peace is replaced by sleep. And so, they lie together in this small world of quiet and fur and flickering light, listening to nothing, saying nothing, needing nothing, only resting, breathing, and existing within the long hush of another ordinary night, inside an Inuit fishing camp, where time moves as slowly as the stars behind the clouds, as full sleep wraps itself around the small shelter like an invisible second skin, and the snow continues its slow descent outside without pause or sound. The interior of the home settles into a state of stillness so complete that even the lamp's glow has faded into memory, replaced now by the kind of darkness that is neither frightening nor total, but soft and alive, shaped by the curves of the structure and the familiar presence of sleeping bodies wrapped in warmth and memory. No one stirs, not the mother whose breath now flows slowly and deeply into the air, nor the children who have long since shifted into positions of comfortable sprawl beneath the caribou hides, their hands resting near each other, even in dreams, nor the grandmother who remains curled like a comma of wisdom near the wall, her expression unreadable in the dark, but her presence steady and grounding. And yet, despite this enveloping silence, the father's eyes remain faintly open, just enough to catch the slight gleam of moonlight where it slips in through a small seam near the roof, a seam no wider than a finger, but enough to remind him of the world beyond the shelter, of snow and ice and stars that continue to exist even when unseen. He does not move, but he listens, not for danger, for there is none tonight, but for reassurance, for the quiet confirmations that life continues. The tiny rustle of hide as someone shifts slightly in their sleep, the almost inaudible huff of a dog turning in its snowbed outside, the whisper of the wind as it curls around the shelter like a forgotten lullaby. His role is not to guard exactly, but to remain attuned, to stay just awake enough that, should something call, he will know it. But nothing calls tonight, and nothing needs to. This is not a place of urgency, not a night of movement. It is a night of holding still, of letting the cold remain outside and the warmth remain within. A perfect balance that needs no adjustment. Thoughts come to him slowly, like smoke rising from a dying fire, and they are not thoughts of worry or planning, but of simple things. The way his son's hands handled the fishing line today, firm and sure, the sound of his wife's voice humming over the lamp, the shape of the snowdrift near the trail that looked like a fox resting beneath the moonlight. These thoughts do not demand anything from him. They are just there, floating gently across the surface of his mind like snowflakes falling over calm water. Eventually, even these thoughts grow lighter, less distinct, and his body begins to drift more fully into the same slow rhythm that fills the room, the rhythm of sleep, shared across generations, across seasons, across centuries of nights just like this one. Outside, the dogs remain still, their breathing deep and even, their bodies curled into tight circles that conserve heat and energy, their trust in the humans complete and unspoken. The snow has covered the sled now, blanketing the tools, softening the outlines of the ropes and wooden frames, turning everything into smooth shapes that will be uncovered again tomorrow with the same care as always. The trail they walked this morning is nearly invisible now, erased gently by nature, not out of malice, but as part of the agreement between people and the land here. Nothing is permanent, and everything returns to stillness in time. High above, the stars are faint behind the clouds, but they are there nonetheless, their distant light touching the frozen world without ever warming it, their constancy a comfort more than their glow. And so, within this tiny world of fur, bone, breath, and silence, the father finally closes his eyes completely, his body sinking into the warmth beside his family, his last breath before sleep as slow and deliberate as the rest of the day has been. No sound breaks the peace, No flicker disturbs the dark, and in the long, unhurried watch of the Arctic night, the family sleeps, together, safely, quietly, held not just by the shelter they built, but by the rhythm of a world that has known their kind for thousands of years, and asks only that they listen, breathe, and rest. Outside the shelter, as the family sleeps beneath their heavy caribou hides, and the oil lamp has long since flickered out, the snow continues to fall in a steady, deliberate rhythm, each flake adding to the growing blanket of a white that already smooths the edges of sled tracks, rounds the corners of tools left half borrayed, and wraps around the bones of the tent like a second skin, reinforcing it not just with weight, but with the dense stillness of insulation crafted by nature itself. The snowfall does not hurry and does not pause, moving with the same eternal slowness as the stars shifting behind the thick gray clouds, unseen but always present, a kind of cosmic rhythm that matches the deep breathing of the land, the long inhalation and exhalation of earth beneath ice. The dogs, buried in their curled positions outside, do not stir, their breath rising and falling in complete harmony with the world around them, ears twitching now and then only to settle again, their sleep deep and earned, undisturbed by dreams or sound. Within the shelter, all movement has ceased, and what remains is the stillness that arrives, not only from rest, but from having lived through a day in full, every moment answered, every gesture given, nothing rushed, nothing skipped, only the long fulfillment of doing what has always been done. The home itself has become almost indistinguishable from the land, its outline softened by the growing snowdrifts, the bones in the roof now covered in white, the entrance flap dusted with powder that clings to the seams and makes the structure seem like a snowbank with breath at its center, far from the camp, beyond even the reach of sound. The ice groans occasionally, a low, slow creak that comes not from pressure or danger, but from the ancient rhythm of frozen rivers shifting under their own weight, of lakes breathing quietly beneath layers of frozen skin, their voices so old and deep that only silence can truly hear them. These sounds are not disruptions, they are acknowledgments, the heartbeat of the land reaching up through layers of snow and silence to remind all that life does not sleep even when it rests. Somewhere in the far distance, a ptarmigan shifts in its burrow, rustling softly under its snowy camouflage, then stills again, its tiny body blending into the silence. The sky, blanketed with cloud, shows no stars and no moon, and yet the darkness is never absolute. It is filled with the quiet reflection of snow, with the faintest traces of distant light bouncing across the cold, with the memory of day still echoing in the air. The snow thickens slightly, flakes falling closer together, layering the camp like pages in a book no one reads, but everyone understands. A story told through repetition rather than change. The temperature lowers degree by degree, but the cold is not cruel. It is even steady, familiar. It sharpens the edges of breath outside the shelter, but it does not cross the line into discomfort within. Inside, the grandmother's hands remain folded as they were hours ago, her eyes gently shut, her posture still and curled, her breath almost imperceptible, but steady, as though she is dreaming of times before shelters were built, before sleds were carved, before tools were sharpened, perhaps even before her own grandmother first told her the story of a mitten and a fox in the snow. The boys shift occasionally beneath the hides, murmuring in sleep, one leg resting across the other, fingers slightly open, lashes dusted faintly with frost that gathers even inside a warm tent in the coldest of places. Their mother lies motionless, her hand touching her child's shoulder lightly, her mouth parted in quiet rest. The father sleeps with one arm across his chest and the other over the furs, his chest rising in a slow rhythm that mirrors the movements of the snowfall outside. This is the kind of night that is forgotten not because it is insignificant, but because it is so deeply ordinary, so thoroughly part of the fabric of life here, that its peace does not need remembering, only living. The land listens and says nothing. The sky watches and gives nothing away. The cold holds the world in place, and the camp, small, buried, warm, alive, sleeps on, wrapped in the quietest kind of safety, the kind that comes from knowing everything is exactly as it should be, and nothing is expected but rest, long before any glow touches the horizon, before the sky has begun its slow return from night to the soft gray of day. Something changes within the quiet, a shift so subtle it could be mistaken for a trick of breath or a dream slipping loose. But in the shelter, buried beneath snow and silence, the father's eyes open slowly in the near complete darkness, not jolted awake, but guided gently by the body's internal rhythm, the same rhythm that follows the cold and the sky, that listens to the whispers of weather even in sleep. He does not move right away. Instead, he lies still, watching the faint outline of the curved roof above him, where the structure arches inward like a rib cage, holding in the last warmth of the night. He listens, not for sound, but for the absence of it, making sure the wind has not turned harsh, the dogs have not barked, the snow has not begun to fall differently, and only once the world continues its quiet does he slowly sit up, the caribou hide sliding off his shoulders with a soft rustle like dry leaves. His breath rises visibly in the cold, a faint plume that disappears almost instantly into the stillness, and he moves carefully, mindful of every sound, every shift, so as not to disturb the deep sleep of the others. The children are bundled in the thick hide, their heads nearly buried, only tufts of hair showing, and the grandmother remains in the same posture as when the night began, her breath slow, and so soft it seems the room itself is breathing with her. The mother stirs faintly as he moves past her, but does not wake, her hand still resting on the child's shoulder, her fingers curled as if in mid-embrace. He crouches near the door, where the snow has gathered more thickly through the night, pressing inward in soft piles, and with deliberate slowness, he brushes it back, lifting the flap just slightly to peer out into the darkness. The outside world is unchanged, white, shadowed, silent. The dogs, visible as still mounds of snow-tipped fur, are curled tightly in their sleeping positions, not yet alert, but not fully lost to rest either. The sled is buried, but not lost. its shape just visible beneath the drifts, and the trail they had made the day before has vanished, filled in by time and snow. This is not surprising, nor is it a problem. It is simply how things are, how they always are. He steps outside slowly, pulling his outer layer over his shoulders, tying the bindings with methodical hands, moving as though the cold is not to be challenged, but acknowledged. The first touch of air on his face bites briefly, but then settles, the body adapting as it always has, warming itself from within. The snow crunches beneath his boots in that familiar way, soft but firm, each step pressing into powder and then compressing into the packed earth beneath, a sound he has heard his entire life, and yet never grown tired of. He walks a small circle around the tent, checking the sled, the tools that were buried, but now begin to reappear beneath his fingers, gently brushed free of snow. He kneels to inspect the dogs, patting one slowly, murmuring a quiet word of thanks as it shifts slightly in acknowledgement, not a bark or a jump, just the faint wag of a tail, still wrapped in sleep. The sky above is a uniform slate, no stars visible, no hint of light yet, but he knows the shape of dawn is approaching, not as a color, but as a feeling, a slight thinning of the darkness, a softening of the horizon. The wind is light, brushing past in long exhalations, not demanding anything, only passing through, and he breathes with it, matching its rhythm. After a while, he returns inside, brushing snow from his shoulders at the entrance, stepping back into the warmth that now feels even more precious after the cold. He does not light the lamp yet. There is no need. The darkness inside is kind, familiar, a companion rather than an obstacle. He lies back down, pulling the hide gently over his chest, turning onto his side toward the others. No one has moved. No one has spoken. But in a short time, the rhythm of the day will begin again, not with alarms or calls, but with slow waking, with the light gradually finding its way into the sky, with the dogs rising and stretching, with tools retrieved from under snow, with another walk to the ice, another line dropped into the deep still water, another day unfolding, not with surprise but with certainty. For now, though, the world remains paused between night and morning, in the soft breath of almost dawn, where everything is held in stillness, and peace is not something sought. It is simply what remains, gradually, as if the sky itself has been holding its breath through the long Arctic night. The first hints of morning light begin to appear, not as a burst, not as a dramatic sunrise, but as a softening, a gentle easing of the darkness that has cradled the sleeping camp for so many hours, turning the pure black of night into a misty silver that touches the edges of the snow with a barest glow, making it glisten like dusted glass. The father opens his eyes again, though he had not been fully asleep, only resting in the shared warmth and stillness, his breath in sync with the rhythm of the sleeping family, his body heavy with comfort, but already beginning to feel the stirrings of movement. The shelter is still quiet, the kind of quiet that feels sacred, as if any sound too sudden might disturb more than just rest. It might shake loose the delicate harmony that has held the camp in its gentle grip all through the night. Yet the light calls to him in its own quiet way. a whisper at the edges of his vision, a reminder that the time to rise will soon arrive, not out of pressure or demand, but out of tradition, out of a cycle as old as the bones of the land beneath the snow. He sits up slowly, the hide sliding off his chest in a soft rustle, the cool air meeting his skin like a familiar friend. And as he moves, the others begin to shift as well, not woken by sound, but by atmosphere, as if the light itself is gently nudging each of them toward awareness. The mother opens her eyes and stretches beneath the blanket, her fingers flexing and then curling again, her face relaxed, her breath steady. One of the boys stirs and murmurs something unintelligible in the haze of sleep, rolling onto his back, before blinking at the soft light filtering through a small crack near the roof. The grandmother lifts her head just slightly and exhales a long, quiet breath before closing her eyes again, not yet ready to leave her place of warmth, but acknowledging that the day has begun. The day has begun. No words are spoken. Not yet, for the first part of the morning is reserved for slow movements and silent understanding. The father retrieves the lamp and begins trimming the wick with practiced hands, his fingers moving in the low light without hesitation, and he fills it with fresh oil from a small container stored carefully near the wall. Each motion deliberate and quiet. When the flame is sparked, it flutters briefly, then steadies into a soft, golden glow that fills the shelter, not with brightness, but with presence, a warm hum of light that pushes back the final edges of night and invites motion. The boys sit up beneath the firs, their hair tousled, their cheeks pink from the lingering cold, and they yawn without sound, blinking toward the light with that particular dazed calm that follows a deep, uninterrupted sleep. The mother helps them with their inner boots, tugging gently, securing bindings, brushing away the small bits of frost that clung to the edges during the night. The grandmother slowly swings her legs beneath her, sitting upright now and wrapping her shawl tighter, watching the flame as if remembering other mornings, other lamps, other songs of light. Outside, the first true breath of day has arrived, the snow reflecting back the sky's gradual brightening. No shadows yet, but no longer night either. The father opens the flap and steps outside, the cold, biting but bearable, the kind that wakes the skin but does not burn. The dogs rise, stretching in their snowy beds, shaking off powdery blankets of white, their bodies ready to work again, without question, without command. The sled, still half buried, waits patiently, the ropes and bindings stiff but serviceable, the tools under snow needing only a moment of brushing. From within the shelter, the soft sounds of movement rise, water being warmed, clothing adjusted, mittens found, a whispered word between mother and child. There is no rush, only return. The camp comes back to life, not with energy, but with continuity, as if the pause of night has simply lifted its hand to allow the next frame of the day to emerge. The snow falls lightly still, just a faint dusting now, tiny flakes floating in lazy spirals from above, catching in the folds of hoods and on the tips of boots. The wind holds steady, light and constant, whispering past the walls of the shelter and weaving its song through the ears of the dogs and the cracks between hide and bone as the family steps outside one by one, preparing for another walk, another cast of the line, another silent meal beside the hole in the ice. They do so with the same quiet rhythm that marked the day before and the day before that. The boys pull the sled free while the mother adjusts the packs. The father checks the net. The grandmother hums softly at the threshold. The light continues to grow, not bright, but brighter, and in its presence, the camp becomes a shape once more, no longer hidden in night, but revealed again to the snow, the wind, and the waiting land. As the light settles into its softest form, neither glowing nor dim, simply existing as a pale blanket across the wide Arctic landscape, the family prepares to once again make their way along the snow-laden trail toward the ice hole. Not a new path, not a journey of discovery, but a familiar return to the rhythm that shapes each day, as steady and expected as the snowflakes that drift constantly from the sky, each one joining the countless others already underfoot, blending into the whiteness without sound or ceremony. The dogs, now fully awake and alert, stretch once more before standing in a practiced line, their tails swaying gently, their bodies swaddled in thick coats that shimmer slightly under the light, not from color, but from the way the snow rests upon them, like dust upon fur. The sled has been cleared of its overnight layer of snow, and the tools, spears, lines, bundles of hide, and fish from yesterday, stored securely, are again arranged in the quiet logic of necessity, everything in its place, everything ready. The father, now dressed in his full outerwear, moves with the calm efficiency that comes from years of repetition, tying each rope and inspecting each harness, not out of worry, but because each knot is a language he knows by heart. The boys walk beside the sled, one brushing off the final bits of snow from its wooden runners, the other rechecking the seal hide coverings that keep the supplies dry and tightly bound, both of them working without instruction, without hesitation, only with the knowledge passed down by motion more than words. The mother places the last of the warm food parcels into a pouch, tying it off with sinew, tucking it under a blanket inside the sled for when the moment for quiet nourishment arrives again later in the day. The grandmother does not walk far ahead. She stays close, her steps slower but purposeful, her stick tapping lightly against the crust of the snow, not as a crutch, but as a companion, marking the rhythm of her pace. And then, once everything is aligned, once the silence has settled back around them, and the readiness of the trail seems to beckon with its invisible hand, they set off, not with shouts or commands, but with a gentle forward lean, a pressure in the harness, a shared momentum that begins the glide of the sled and the crunch of their boots into fresh, untouched powder. The trail itself has disappeared beneath the snowfall of the night, but the path is still known, felt more than seen, guided by instinct, memory, and the subtle undulations of the terrain, those shallow dips and rises that exist only to those who've walked them enough times to know their moods. The wind brushes gently past them, not forceful, but persistent, slipping through the folds of clothing and tickling the edges of hoods, whispering nothing specific, only murmurs of cold and time. As they walk, they do not speak, for there is nothing that needs saying. The crunch of feet, The swish of sled and the breath of dogs are their language now. The youngest boy pauses once to glance up at the sky, watching a bird, a lone speck, drifting high above, wings still, gliding effortlessly through the pale air. And then he lowers his gaze again, satisfied with the moment, continuing on without remark. The mother adjusts a strap that has come loose, her fingers working quickly, her body blocking the wind from the exposed bundle beneath. And then she moves on as if nothing had occurred, slipping back into place beside the sled. Ahead, the shape of the fishing site begins to emerge once more, not sharp or sudden, but slowly revealing itself as familiar landmarks begin to peek from beneath snow. A slight rise in the land, the curve of a drift against a buried supply marker, the faint memory of a footprint pressed deeper than the snow that covered it. The father walks ahead now, veering slightly toward the spot he knows will be safest, strongest, where the ice holds firm and the water below remains calm. The dogs slow at his signal. No sound needed, only a glance and a slight shift in posture, and the sled eases to a gentle stop. They have arrived not at the end of something, but at the middle, the continuation of yesterday, of many yesterdays. The snow falls softly around them, quiet as breath, and the world, once again, waits. Once the sled comes to its soft stop beside the fishing site, the family once again begins the delicate sequence of gestures and tasks that begin the day's quiet work, a routine so familiar that it flows between them without the need for words, each movement unfolding like the next step in a dance that has always been performed on this snow-covered stage beneath the gray sky. The father kneels beside the ice hole, now partially concealed by the fresh layer of overnight snow and the thin, ghostly crust of ice that has gently sealed its surface since yesterday's last cast. He brushes it away with slow sweeps of a padded glove, careful not to disturb the shape of the circle, and then, reaching for the short-handled chisel, begins the rhythmic work of breaking through the newer layer. Tap, tap, scrape, each sound ringing out softly in the frozen air, the only percussion in a world otherwise filled with hush. Beside him, the older boy crouches, inspecting the lines, running his fingers along the loops of sinew and bone-carved hooks, making sure no part is frayed or stiffened too much by the cold. He speaks no questions, and the father gives no instruction. Both understand what must be done, and so they simply do it, side by side. The younger child, sitting cross-legged with his arms tucked into his sleeves, watches intently, not out of boredom, but as part of learning, the kind of observation that becomes knowledge over time, pressed into the mind like a handprint in softened snow. A few feet away, the mother unpacks the bundles from the sled, retrieving food, the extra line, and the tools that had been warmed by the fire before they left, carefully wrapped in hide to keep them supple. She sets everything out on a low, flattened patch of snow, the surface packed firm by boots and work, placing each item precisely where it should go. The grandmother, seated on a folded skin with her back to the wind, takes a moment to stretch her fingers, then begins rubbing a small piece of waxed sinew between her palms to soften it before handing it to the younger boy, who grins and accepts the offering like a quiet badge of inclusion. The dogs lie in the snow nearby, their forms still and calm, watching with half-closed eyes, their ears flicking every so often at distant sounds. Nothing close, nothing urgent, just the far-off echoes of the land continuing its own quiet business. Soon the hole is cleared, the water visible again in its dark, reflective stillness, like a portal to a world where sound does not exist, and light is only a suggestion. The father lowers the first line, slow and steady, feeling each knot pass through his fingers, watching the way the baited hook disappears into the black. There is no expectation of immediacy. Fish do not rush, and neither do they. The line is tied off on a small hook, anchored into the ice beside the hole, and then the next line is prepared, this time handled by the boy, who mimics the motion with care, his brow furrowed slightly in focus, but his hands sure. The mother sits beside them now, holding the spear across her knees, sharpening the tip with a soft, rasping sound that matches the scrape of wind across the snow. Every so often, she glances toward the horizon, noting the shape of distant clouds, the arc of a drifting snowbank, the angle of light bending faintly around the sky, quiet signs that speak of weather not yet arrived. The grandmother begins to hum again, a low wandering tune with no beginning and no refrain, a sound that drapes itself gently across the snow, like the shadow of a bird gliding overhead. The lines remain still, the surface of the water calm, the cold pressing in around them, not with hostility, but with constancy, reminding them with every breath and every touch of the snow that this world is unchanging, and that in its stillness lies all that they need. The day unfolds with no announcements, no sudden shifts, only the slow return to doing, clearing, lowering, waiting. They sit, hands wrapped in fur, breath fogging the air, eyes on the lines that disappear into the deep. And even though it looks the same as yesterday, feels the same as every other day before it, the act of repeating these moments is what shapes the meaning, the belief that by doing these things again, slowly, patiently, they are not merely surviving the cold, but living inside it, part of a rhythm older than language. There is no fish yet. There is no rush. The line is in the water. The ice has been cleared. The family sits in peace beneath the open sky, and the snow, as always, continues to fall. The line has been cast, the tools laid out, the sled positioned neatly to one side, and now begins the longest part of the routine, the waiting, the simple, undemanding act of being still beside the dark hole in the ice, while time moves not forward, but outward, stretching in every direction like the horizon itself, without edge, without pressure, only presence. The father sits with one knee raised and an elbow resting casually upon it, his eyes watching the water, not sharply or with tension, but with the steady gaze of someone who has done this countless times, someone who knows that fishing beneath the ice is not about catching as much as it is about watching, breathing, listening. He does not check his line constantly, nor does he adjust it unless it is needed. The line remains steady, disappearing into the black circle beneath the snow, and above it, The family settles into the same stillness, their breath forming gentle clouds that drift and vanish before falling back into silence. The older son crouches beside his line, resting his chin in his gloved hand, not bored, not restless, just quiet, eyes tracing the tiny patterns in the snow, where wind has swept a few grains into ripples and ridges, like miniature dunes on a frozen sea. The younger boy builds a tiny structure from chunks of snow near his side, stacking them with the focus of an architect whose project will vanish before the day ends, but whose purpose lies entirely in the doing. Each piece is pressed gently into place, shaped by his mittened hands, and he pauses often to inspect the balance. The way one snow block rests upon another, the mother sits with her legs folded beneath her, slowly stitching a small tear in one of the mittens that had gone unnoticed the day before, her bone needle gliding through the material with soft efficiency, each pull of the sinew thread accompanied by a tiny squeak, a gentle tug, and the quiet satisfaction of maintaining what they already have, rather than longing for something else. The grandmother remains seated on the low fur pad near the sled, her body swathed in dark folds of sealskin and lined cloth, her hands resting in her lap, eyes half closed as she listens, not to any particular sound, but to the fullness of everything, the faint whine of wind across the snow, the distant caw of a bird somewhere overhead, the occasional groan of the ice beneath them, expanding or shifting or simply remembering. No one speaks unless there is something truly worth saying, and that threshold is high in a place like this, where most things can be communicated by a glance or a movement, or not at all. A single fish, small and silver, is eventually pulled from the water by the father, not quickly, not suddenly, but after a long pause and a subtle twitch of the line that only he seemed to notice. He pulls it in with smooth motions, unhurried, the way one might cradle a secret into the open, and when the fish breaks the surface, it flops only once before falling still. The mother reaches forward to collect it, wraps it in hide, places it beside the others from the day before. No celebration, only quiet acknowledgement. Another thread added to the long braid of survival, and then the lines are lowered again, and the waiting continues. The sun, though never high, has moved slightly, just enough that the shadows have changed their angle, just enough that the light catches differently on the patches of ice between snowbanks, illuminating edges that were invisible earlier. One of the dogs lifts its head briefly, sniffs the air, then settles again with a deep, warm breath, paws curled beneath its chest. The snow continues to fall lightly, not a storm, not a flurry, only the constant, steady rhythm of white, flakes landing silently on shoulders, on the sled, on the open palms of the younger boy, who now sits with his arms outstretched to catch them, counting aloud in a whisper, though his numbers trail off somewhere around 20, and he doesn't begin again. The grandmother hums a line from a tune that has no name, letting the melody drift and falter and start again, a sound softer than the wind, yet somehow more lasting. And so the family waits, not impatiently, not aimlessly, but fully present within this moment, this task, this place where stillness is not emptiness, but fulfillment. The ice holds beneath them, The snow gathers around them, the sky watches above them, and the line stays in the water, quietly connected to the deep, quiet world below. As the day drifts forward in its gentle, unhurried arc, and the low light begins to shift ever so slightly, not growing brighter or darker, but simply changing its tone, the family begins to sense, not from clocks or shadows, but from the deep, bodily intuition that comes from living close to the rhythms of the land, that it is time for a pause, not an end to their work, but a moment to sit more fully, to eat, to breathe with greater intention, to feel the middle of the day settle softly around them, like the thick snowflakes continuing to fall in silence all around. The father reels in his line with patient hands, not because he expects a catch, but because this is the time when the line is meant to rest, when even the water below, still and dark as ever, seems to still further, becoming quieter than quiet. A pause beneath the ice. The boys also rise, one slowly wrapping his fishing line, and the other tucking the snow-block tower he'd been building under a hide to keep it from collapsing too quickly. A small act of preservation, even for something that is meant to melt. The mother, having already anticipated the moment, unfolds a parcel from the sled. Inside are thin pieces of dried fish, slightly warmed by her body heat, wrapped in layers of hide to keep out the moisture, along with a small pouch of softened berries and a skin filled with warm broth that had been insulated beneath thick fur. She unrolls a sitting cloth across the snow and places the food upon it with quiet hands, her every movement a part of a familiar and unspoken ceremony, one that honors not the food itself, but the time taken to share it in peace. The family gathers in a loose circle around the offering, no one pushing forward, no one waiting to be served, each taking what they need, no more, no less. The grandmother sits with a slight grunt of effort, lowering herself slowly but steadily onto the soft skin laid beside the sled, her shawl pulled tighter around her shoulders, her gaze focused on the steam that curls from the open mouth of the broth container, spiraling upward before vanishing into the pale air. They eat in silence, not because silence is required, but because it is respected, a companion rather than a void, filling the space with its calm presence. Every so often, a soft word is exchanged, a hand offered to pass a piece of fish, a nod of thanks, given with the eyes instead of the voice. The food is simple but sustaining, the kind that fills the stomach without weighing down the limbs, the kind that has kept generations alive in this place where the wind is a constant presence and the snow never leaves. The dogs are fed too, a few pieces set aside and tossed gently in their direction, and they receive the offering with quiet gratitude, tails flicking once before curling again around their bodies. The father chews slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon, not for danger, but in the way a man might glance at the face of a clock, not for urgency, but to feel the time pass. The mother rests for a moment, sitting with her hands on her knees, eyes closed, head slightly bowed, not in sleep, but in a kind of meditation, as if she were listening for something beneath the snow, something quiet and eternal. The children, once finished, lie back briefly against a slope of packed snow, gazing upward toward the sky, which has now become an endless canvas of white on gray, indistinct and borderless, and they let the flakes land on their faces, blinking slowly, breathing the cold in with long, quiet inhales, quiet inhales. The grandmother hums a phrase again, the same tune from earlier, though now it seems slower, more stretched out, as if even the melody itself were lying down for a rest. The wind picks up only slightly, enough to cause a ripple in the sled's covering, enough to brush past the faces of the seated family with a whisper, not of warning, but of presence. And so they sit, eat, and rest, not because the work is finished, but because they know that moments like this are what make the work meaningful. The lines will return to the water soon. The tools will be gathered again. The day will continue to drift forward. But for now, they remain still in this shared moment, beneath the heavy sky, surrounded by snow, wrapped in silence, warmed by food and breath, and held gently by a world that asks nothing more of them than to simply be. After the small, quiet meal has been finished, and the warmth of shared food has settled like an ember in each belly, the family remains seated a little longer in the slow hush of the midday pause, not out of fatigue, but simply because there is no urgency to move, no pressing reason to disturb the stillness that has wrapped itself so gently around them. The sky above remains soft and unchanging, blanketed in its muted gray that offers no shadow and no glare, only an even, diffused light that reflects off the snow with a glow so mild it seems to hum rather than shine. One by one, without signal or command, they begin to shift. First the father, who slowly brushes snow from his gloves and folds the sitting cloth with practiced hands. Then the mother, who carefully reseals the food pouch and tucks it once more into the sled beneath the coverings, checking the knots to make sure no corner of hide or fur has come loose. The children stretch, rising not with groans or laughter, but with a kind of wordless grace, their limbs unfolding like the petals of a snowflower, slow and soft, and without speaking, they begin returning to their quiet roles, the older boy lifting the coil of fishing line again, and the younger brushing loose snow from the flat area beside the hole, restoring the small workspace to its earlier shape. The grandmother remains seated a while longer, her eyes open but distant, following the slow arc of a drifting snowflake as it dances through the air in a lazy spiral before disappearing into the folds of her shawl. When she does move, it is without ceremony, just a shift of weight, a firm press of her palm to the ground, and a steady rise to her feet with the help of her carved walking stick. There is a dignity in every movement, not because of age or wisdom alone, but because here, everything done slowly is done with care. The father approaches the ice hole again and checks the water, which remains dark and still, the kind of stillness that is not emptiness, but depth, a silence beneath the surface that mirrors the quiet above. He lowers the line once more, his gloved hands feeding it down in measured lengths, the baited hook disappearing into the black as if swallowed by time itself. The boy does the same beside him, his motions slightly quicker, a little less fluid, but still steady, still respectful of the rhythm required. No one expects a fish immediately, nor even within the hour. The catching is not the point, not entirely. What matters more is the act of trying, the ritual of engagement with the ice, the repetition of skill passed through time, the belief that somewhere beneath the frozen stillness, life continues and may, when it is ready, rise to meet them. The mother smooths the sled's covering, checks the binding on the spear handle, brushes snow from the dog's fur, and then takes her seat again on a folded piece of hide, resting but alert, present in the way of someone who knows that watching is a form of work too. The grandmother stands now behind the boys, one hand resting gently on the older one's shoulder, not to guide or teach, but simply to connect, to remind through touch that she is there and that the work they do is part of something long and deep. The wind lifts faintly again, combing across the surface of the snow in thin waves, and the sound it makes is soft and hollow, like a breath exhaled into a shell. The ice beneath them groans once more, not sharply, but like a slow stretch, a sighing reminder that the lake is still alive, still watching, still part of their world, even as it sleeps beneath its frozen roof. The dogs rest quietly, their bodies forming low mounds of fur and snow, their eyes closed, tails tucked close, ears twitching occasionally in response to far-off sounds that no one else can hear. The shadows lengthen, but only slightly, as the day continues its gentle drift forward. There is no story being told in this moment, no new event to mark the time, only the continuation of the work, the soft return to action after rest, the lines held steady over dark water, the warmth of food fading from their fingers but lingering in their bones, the snow falling in slow spirals as if the sky itself were rocking them gently back into the rhythm of another afternoon beneath the pale and endless Arctic sky. Time continues its slow, barely perceptible passage over the white expanse of snow and sky, the family remaining in place around the cleared hole in the ice. Lines cast once more into the water below, each hand steady, each gaze relaxed, the world around them quiet except for the occasional whisper of wind brushing against fur and the gentle sighs of the snow shifting minutely beneath layered boots and knees. The light, if it could be called that, has barely changed, still that silvery, pale gray that neither brightens nor dims, simply existing as a soft veil drawn across the dome of the sky, allowing the hours to drift indistinguishably into one another without fanfare. Then, without warning, and yet without surprise, the line in the older boy's hand gives a subtle pull, not a sharp tug, but a slow, deliberate weight that lets him know, unmistakably, that something beneath the ice has taken interest. He doesn't cry out, doesn't move quickly, simply stiffens slightly and looks to his father, who is already watching. The father gives a single nod, and the boy begins to pull, inch by inch, letting the rhythm guide him rather than trying to force it, the line rising from the hole in smooth, measured motions as though retrieving not a fish, but a secret gently rising through the darkness. As the hook nears the surface, the glint of movement becomes visible beneath the hole, a shimmer of scales catching the ambient light, and soon the fish is pulled free, a char, medium-sized, its body slick and glistening, eyes dull with the cold, its tail flapping once, before falling still. The boy's hands do not tremble. He lays the fish carefully on the snow beside the hole and breathes out slowly, not with pride, but with gratitude, as if the act of pulling life from water were not victory, but continuity. The mother leans forward to collect the fish, wrapping it in a length of hide, tying it off with a short strand of sinew, and placing it gently among the others that now rest in the sled. Nothing is said. There is no applause, no congratulations, only the slight upward twitch of the grandmother's mouth, a nearly invisible smile as she watches from behind her fur-wrapped shawl. The boy returns to his line and checks it once again, unfazed by the moments passing, content to sit back into stillness and cast again. The father shifts his weight and refocuses on his own line. The younger child, who had been tracing shapes in the snow with a small stick, quietly adds a fish shaped to the curved patterns near his knee, carving scales with a thumbnail and smiling faintly at his own creation. The dogs rest as they did before, their thick coats rising and falling with their breath, content in the cold, unaware of the catch, but in tune with the tone of the camp, calm, unchanged, peaceful. Overhead, the clouds move slowly, spreading and curling like stretched fabric, occasionally parting just enough to let a faint glow of light filter through before merging again. Snow continues to fall, as it has since morning, not heavily, but persistently, a thin veil of flakes settling on shoulders and gloves, resting on the edges of gear and fur, melting only where warmth remains. No one rushes to cast again. No one checks their line with urgency. The fish has been caught, and the ice has offered something, and so the family rests in the presence of that offering without demanding more. Time passes again in long, slow breaths, the lines hanging silently over the dark water, the breeze tracing soft arcs across the open space, the world moving in such subtle increments that nothing feels different even when something has changed. The father adjusts the scarf around his neck and glances toward the ridge far in the distance, not expecting anything, just observing it as he always does, part of his daily accounting of horizon and sky. The grandmother lowers her gaze and closes, her eyes not asleep but immersed in thought, the kind of thought that has no words but is filled with memory and sensation, old winters and older songs. The mother pours a few drops of warm broth from the skin into a carved cup and hands it to the younger boy, who drinks it slowly, the steam curling up into his face, softening his cheeks already kissed pink by the cold. The sled creaks faintly as a small gust of wind tugs at the fur covering, but no one moves to fix it. The sound is familiar, expected, comforting. They continue sitting, breathing, watching. The second fish lies wrapped and preserved, a quiet symbol of another small success in a long line of steady days. And though there may yet be more before dusk, there is no rush to make it so. The lines remain still, the water remains silent, and the family waits, together in the white, with nothing needed, and nothing missing, and nothing missing. The lines dangle silently into the hole in the ice, unmoving in the dark water below, and with no tugs or tremors to call their attention, the family allows their gazes to drift away from the narrow task of fishing and outward toward the wider world of white, the endless, snow-covered horizon stretching around them like the inside of a bowl carved from ice, its rim lined with drifting snowbanks, and the faint silhouettes of low, distant ridges softened by time and distance. With the stillness of their lines holding steady, the work becomes not active, but contemplative, a different kind of labor, of watching, of noticing, of being present in a landscape where even the subtlest movement carries meaning. The father's eyes trace a long line across the snow, following the marks left by a small animal, likely an Arctic hare or fox, that passed during the night or early morning, its prints half covered by new snow, but still readable to someone who knows what to look for. He doesn't point them out, doesn't speak, only watches them quietly, noting the direction they came from and the angle at which they shifted course. The older boy sees the same trail and nods to himself, mimicking his father's gaze, trying to learn what it is to read the land, not with curiosity, but with fluency. The mother glances up at the clouds and narrows her eyes ever so slightly, not from strain, but from habit, her mind gauging the speed of their movement, the way the light behind them dims and pulses, calculating without numbers the possibility of stronger winds or a change in the snow's texture. The grandmother, seated with her hands folded in her lap, hums quietly, barely above the whisper of the wind, her voice rising and falling like the low, repetitive rhythm of waves lapping under a dock. Though there is no sea in sight and the only water is buried deep below the frozen crust of the world around them, the younger boy leans back into a shallow snowbank he made for himself earlier, staring upward at the uniform sky, watching the occasional drift of a snowflake pass directly in front of his face, blinking slowly, as if tracking time by the flakes alone. One lands on his nose, and he does not flinch, only lets it melt and disappear. The wind shifts direction just slightly, bringing with it a change in the pitch of sound across the snowfield, a longer, smoother note that carries no urgency, only a subtle difference that those who live close to the land can feel in their shoulders and in the lining of their coats. The dogs raise their heads almost in unison, sniffing the air, not alarmed, but attentive, their ears perking toward the distant ridge where nothing can be seen but the idea of motion hangs loosely in the light. It might be a gust of wind between ice ridges. It might be a bird flying low to the ground, or it might be nothing at all, but still the family pauses and lets their attention widen to include whatever that unseen shift might be. And then, as quickly as the moment stretched out, it passes. The wind returns to its previous direction. The sound settles. The dogs lay their heads back on their paws, and the world once again exhales into stillness. No fish have bitten. The water remains undisturbed. The sky remains unchanged, and still, the family watches, not because they expect something to happen, but because the act of watching is part of the life they lead here. The father stands slowly, brushes snow from his knees, and walks a few steps to the side to inspect the snowpack near a shallow drift, pressing it with his boot to feel its firmness, gauging how it might shift if the wind were to pick up. He crouches and gathers a handful, packs it loosely between his palms, examines its texture, not too dry, not too wet, then scatters it back into the wind without a word. The children resume their stillness, and the mother begins slowly rapping one of the unused lines, not because it is time to leave, but because she senses it may be time to pause again soon. The grandmother rests her chin on her palm and looks toward the sled, not out of concern, but as a way of grounding herself again, recentering within the slow landscape. They have not moved much, and nothing significant has changed. But in their stillness, they have continued the day, the way snow continues to fall, unseen in its progress, quiet in its presence, but always there. The lines remain in the water, the snow continues to gather, and the family stays seated, patient and calm, not waiting for anything in particular, but simply sharing another motionless hour in the great silence of the north. After long hours of sitting quietly beside the hole in the ice, feeling the rhythm of the cold deepen into the bones, and the weight of the day grow heavier on the shoulders in that soft, pressing way that does not tire so much as slow the blood and quiet the mind, the family gradually begins to shift into the next part of the afternoon. Not packing up, not yet, but preparing for the later return by checking what must be repaired, what must be tightened, and what must simply be touched again to ensure it lasts. The father rises slowly from where he had been crouched, his knees stiff from the stillness, his boots crackling softly against the frozen snow beneath him, and he stretches in that deliberate, quiet way that speaks not of complaint but of acknowledgement, his body aware of time, of the cold, of the layers of habit that wrap around him like his clothes. He walks to the sled and unrolls a narrow strip of sealskin, revealing a bundle of tools wrapped inside: a knife, a bone awl, a length of spare sinew, a flat stone used for smoothing edges, and a small pouch of waxed thread. These are the items that are not used constantly, but are always needed, kept clean and dry, and ready for the quiet moments between fishing, when the mind and the hands can turn toward care and maintenance rather than waiting and watching. The mother joins him, kneeling beside the sled and beginning to inspect the bindings of the spear shaft, running her fingers slowly along the seams, checking for any signs of stress or moisture. And when she finds one spot where the wrap has come slightly loose from the haft, she does not sigh or frown. She simply reaches for the awl and begins the process of unwinding, rethreading, and rebinding with practiced ease. Her motions slow and fluid, not rushed but entirely purposeful. Beside her, the older boy unwinds a line from a storage reel and lays it out straight on the snow, pressing down the curled ends, inspecting the knots where the hook is tied, and then rubbing the length of it between his palms to warm and soften the fibers. The younger boy, seated nearby with his legs tucked under him, begins sharpening the edge of a small bone tool against a stone, his tongue poking out slightly from the corner of his mouth in concentration, his strokes slow and careful as he tries to mimic the movement he has seen his father make 1,000 times. The grandmother watches them all with eyes half-lidded, one hand folded beneath her chin, the other resting on her lap. Not asleep, but resting in the way one rests after years of doing the same work, able to sense when something is being done correctly without needing to inspect it, hearing the right sound of a blade on stone or the steady tension of thread being pulled through hide. From time to time, She lifts a hand to adjust the shawl across her shoulders or brush snow from her sleeves, her breath moving in slow, measured exhales that fog the air before fading. The dogs remain close to the sled, one or two stretching out now and then to roll onto their sides, legs twitching as they drift between light sleep and watchfulness, their ears flicking at every gust of wind, every crunch of boot or bark echoing from far across the tundra. The wind is steady now, not strong, not biting, but steady, and it moves across the surface of the snow with the consistency of a hand stroking fur, smoothing the drifts, brushing along the sled's wooden edges, lifting tiny crystals into swirling spirals that glint briefly in the diffused daylight before settling again. No one speaks. The tools say enough, the sound of sinew threading through holes, of hide being pulled taut, of stone meeting bone. All of these are familiar, quiet conversations between people and the things they trust to help them survive. When one repair is finished, another is begun. A strap on the sled is tightened. A boot sole is checked. A notch in the spear shaft is gently reworked. These are not chores, but traditions, rituals of preservation, ways of saying to the land, we are still here, still doing what must be done, still honoring the cycle that lets us live. In this silence, the snow gathers slowly again on shoulders, on the sled, on the unfinished tasks, and each flake is brushed away gently, not hurriedly, as if to say yes, we see you, we accept your presence, but not just yet. We have one more knot to tie, one more edge to smooth, one more piece of thread to pull through, before we sit back again, watching the lines, waiting for the next pull from the water, or the quiet that says it's time to return. With the final threads tied, the tools repacked, and the hides folded neatly over the repaired gear, the family slowly returns to their fishing spots beside the hole in the ice, not in a rush, not because they expect anything new, but because this is what follows, the natural continuation after the hands have worked, the eyes have scanned the sled, and the breath has settled into its deeper rhythm again. The father lowers the line back into the water, watching as the hook vanishes into the still blackness, as if returning a thought to the depths of silence, letting it drift where he cannot see. His movements are automatic now, shaped by hundreds of repetitions, each knot in the line familiar beneath his gloves, every curve of the bone hook pressed into his memory, like a signature, like a signature. Beside him, the older boy mimics the same gesture, casting his line with careful steadiness, his hands sure and quiet, his eyes less expectant now, more accepting of the long, slow way the water gives or does not. The mother sits with her legs tucked beneath her, a fresh wrap around her shoulders, watching the dogs now, observing the way they've formed a loose semicircle near the sled, their heads resting on crossed paws, their eyes only half closed, alert even in their seeming stillness. The wind has slowed again, and in its place is an unusual hush, as if the entire expanse of snow and sky has paused for breath, waiting with the family in an unspoken truce of stillness. The younger child sits cross-legged near the ice, building a new shape in the snow. Not a tower this time, but something flatter. A circle, maybe a map, maybe nothing at all. and he traces patterns into the surface with a smooth stone, not concerned with how long it will last, only with the way the cold resists and yields beneath his touch. The grandmother reclines slightly, leaning against the folded pack behind her, her hands now idle in her lap, one thumb brushing absently across her palm in a rhythm known only to her. She does not look at the water, nor at the sky, but at the thin trail of snow caught in the wind, a white ribbon curling and rising before falling apart again, as if it were a story beginning but never needing to end. No new words are spoken. There is nothing that must be said. Even the fire of activity from the repairs has faded now, leaving only the soft aftermath, the way silence returns and stretches out like a fur laid flat across the ground, covering everything in a shared sense of completion. The shadows remain subtle, barely shifting beneath the clouded sky, but the family senses the passage of time in their bones, in the weight of clothing against skin, in the deepening of the cold along the edges of their boots. Occasionally, a line shifts, not with a pull, but with the slow sway of water below, and each time, the family glances, just briefly, before returning to their watch. A bird passes overhead, its wings outstretched against the pale light, and it moves so slowly it seems suspended in time, a single black mark drifting through the expanse, unhurried and alone. The older boy follows it with his eyes, and the younger one reaches for it with his hand, fingers outstretched, then lets them fall back into his lap. The grandmother closes her eyes again, not to sleep, but to listen more deeply, and the faint sound of the father's breath, the mother's shifting feet, the dog's occasional sighs, all combine into a hum that is almost like a song, though no one is singing. The lines remain still. The water does not speak. The snow continues to fall, light and unbothered, collecting in the spaces between movement and breath, settling across sleeves, dogs' backs, the edges of the sled. It covers the circle drawn by the child, softening the lines, erasing them with kindness. And as they wait, not for anything, but simply in the act of waiting, the family becomes part of the stillness once more, an extension of the land, of the snow, of the endless pause between sky and ice. No sound rises, no change occurs, and yet everything continues, slowly, softly, without beginning or end. Though the hour cannot be measured in precise moments or told from the position of the sun, the light begins to change in a way that those who live by the ice can feel before they see. A slight dimming of contrast, the way snow begins to reflect less and absorb more of the gray sky above. A subtle cooling of the wind's touch on cheeks, and a faint ache in the fingers that tells of approaching evening. Even before shadows start to stretch, the family does not react with suddenness to this change. There is no signal, no announcement that the day is moving toward its next chapter. Instead, they begin to notice smaller things, details that only appear when the light starts to fade. The father, sitting beside the ice hole, watches how the water now mirrors less of the sky and more of the dark, as though the lake below is waking up in reverse, becoming opaque where it had been translucent, more shadow than surface. His line remains steady, untouched by fish, but he does not pull it in. He continues to hold it loosely in one hand, not with expectation, but with the patient respect of someone who knows the difference between absence and refusal. The older boy looks down at his gloves and sees the snow that has gathered on the backs, not new or heavy, just a thin crust of crystals that sparkle less now, their edges dulling as the sky thickens. He brushes them off slowly, methodically, watching them fall and vanish into the layers already beneath him. The younger child traces his finger along the small ridge he built earlier, following the shape like a trail, but the snow has begun to fill in his design, softening the clean lines, and rather than fix it, he lets it happen, gently patting the surface as if to thank the snow for completing what he began. The mother unrolls a second fur wrap and drapes it over the tools not in use, her hands lingering longer over each item than before, not to warm them, but to mark the end of their usefulness for today. She checks the knot on the hide-wrapped fish and tightens it, though it doesn't need tightening, an act of closure more than necessity. The grandmother, who has not spoken since morning, clears her throat quietly, a sound like wind brushing through driftwood, and shifts her seat slightly closer to the sled, tucking her feet beneath her and resting both hands on her knees. She watches the dogs now, their ears no longer twitching with alertness, but turned inward, their bodies curling tighter as the light fades, conserving heat and energy, knowing without instruction that the day is winding down. The birds that passed overhead earlier have disappeared now, or perhaps they've simply flown lower, into the shadows, where the eye does not follow. The sky remains the same color, but something within it has shifted, the way a drum beat slows without changing its sound, or the way a song can fall silent between notes without truly stopping. The wind carries a colder bite now, not fierce, but pointed, brushing against the back of the neck in a way that makes the body instinctively want to turn inward, to pull the fur closer, to seek shelter, not from storm, but from duration. The father finally pulls in his line, winding it in slow coils and brushing the ice from each knot before tucking the hook into the padding near the chisel. The boy does the same, mirroring his father's posture, not disappointed, but content, his line clean, his hands steady. The mother rises to gather the food pouch, checking that it is still sealed, running her thumb along the seam where it was stitched long ago. The grandmother stands with a small sound of effort, leaning slightly on her stick, not because of weakness, but because she has learned the kindness of supporting herself. The youngest child tucks the stone he had been carving with into his mitten, keeping it warm for no particular reason. Together, they move a little closer to one another, the space between them narrowing as the cold spreads slowly around the fishing hole. The ice below them remains still. The snow continues to fall, finer now, lighter, almost like dust settling over a scene that has remained unchanged for centuries. The wind hums, the light dims, and the family prepares, not to leave just yet, but to begin the long, slow act of preparing to return. First in thought, then in motion, then in silence, as the light continues to fade into a softer, cooler version of itself, the snow falling in finer, more deliberate flakes. The family begins the slow transition from stillness to movement once more, not with sudden gestures or loud words, but with quiet motions that acknowledge the day's nearing end, a shared awareness that it is time to begin the journey back toward warmth and shelter, to close the circle of labor and return to rest. The father is the first to rise completely, unfolding his limbs with the kind of care that comes not from fatigue, but from understanding that even standing is part of the rhythm here, something to be done slowly, with attention to balance and breath. He moves to the sled with quiet purpose, brushing off the new snow that has settled over the gear, shaking it from the outer furs and wooden frame with wide sweeps of his gloved hands, the motion slow and wide, like someone clearing a memory rather than an object. The dogs rise too, one by one, their muscles stretching with fluid ease, their thick fur flecked with frost, eyes bright but calm as they step into place beside the sled, their bodies already anticipating the tug of harness and the feel of packed snow beneath their paws. The mother begins collecting the smaller items, wrapping the tools again in their designated furs, securing the hides with long strips of sinew, each knot tied with the same care as the first, because every item, no matter how simple, matters in a land where forgetting is never kind. The older boy silently rolls his line and stores it alongside his father's, mimicking every movement without being told, the learning already inside his hands. The younger child gathers up his stone and smooths the snow where he had been sitting, not because anyone asked him to, but because he wants to leave it as it was, flat and clean, like a blank page. Waiting for the next drawing, the grandmother places her hand once on the top of the sled, resting there for a moment before slowly making her way toward it, her walking stick marking the snow with light indentations, each step deliberate, stable, and known. There is no urgency to their packing, no rushing to beat the dark, because the dark here is not feared. It is expected. It is part of the design, something that accompanies them home, like an old friend walking behind at a polite distance. The wind has calmed again, curling gently around their legs, whispering around the sled's corners, raising tiny flurries that vanish almost as soon as they form. The father tightens the bindings around the loaded sled, checking each strap twice, then once more, not because he doubts his work, but because the cold has a way of loosening what was once secure. The mother helps fasten the harness to the dogs, her touch brief and confident, her movements guided by memory and pattern rather than instruction. When everything is in place and all is packed, the family stands still for a moment beside the fishing hole, now filling slowly with snow again, the rim softening, the opening fading back into the landscape, as if the water below were never disturbed, as if the ice had never been broken, the land erasing their presence with gentleness rather than indifference. No one speaks, but each of them looks at it just for a moment longer, as if to say, "Thank you," not aloud, but inwardly, respectfully. Then the father nods once, and the dogs begin to move, their feet pressing into the trail that they know so well, their bodies shifting in unison, the sled gliding behind them like a memory made tangible, like the tail end of a dream not yet forgotten. The family begins to walk beside it, falling into the same quiet formation as before, the father leading slightly, the boys to the side, the mother adjusting the rear straps, and the grandmother walking with quiet dignity at the end. The trail behind them begins to form again, faint but true, a line pressed gently into the wide whiteness, marking their return not with announcement, but with presence. The snow continues to fall. The sky darkens by degrees, and the long journey home begins, not as an event, but as a continuation, the slow turning of another page in a story told not in words, but in footsteps, breath, and the soft press of wind against fur. The trail home, though no longer visible beneath the snow that has continued to fall in its soft, relentless way since morning, exists as surely beneath their feet as the memory of breath, unseen, unspoken, but never forgotten. And as the family makes their way slowly across the vast, open whiteness, the sled gliding quietly behind the steady movements of the dogs, they follow not a marked route, but a rhythm etched into their bones, each footstep pressing into fresh snow with the confidence of those who know a place, not by maps or signs, but by feel, by wind, by the angle of the slope beneath the surface. The sky above them has begun its shift into early twilight, though there is no dramatic sunset, only a gradual deepening of the gray, a slight cooling of the air, a dimming that folds gently over the land like a thick blanket being laid over a sleeping child. The dogs move at an even pace, not pulling hard, not dragging, their bodies well practiced in this work, their ears flicking at small sounds, perhaps distant creaks of the ice shifting in its frozen shell, or the occasional call of a snowbird unseen in the clouds. The sled leaves a light trail behind, cutting twin lines into the soft powder, and the father watches it occasionally, over his shoulder, not out of concern, but with the quiet assurance of someone for whom the sled is not a burden, but a companion, a partner in the work of each day. The mother walks beside it, one hand resting lightly on the edge, ready to adjust the covering if the wind rises, her other hand holding the strap of a small pouch, pressed close to her body. She glances at the children now and then, watching them without hovering, letting them move as they wish, their boots lifting and falling in rhythm, their coats dusted with snow, their hoods pulled low. The older boy hums quietly to himself, not a tune so much as a string of sounds that mimic the wind and the soft crunch of footsteps. The younger one trails his hand through the snow as he walks, drawing a long, wavering line beside his boot prints, watching how the powder parts around his fingers and then collapses again. The grandmother, walking a few steps behind, taps her walking stick into the snow with each step, its light thump rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat echoing against the earth. She does not hurry, nor does she lag behind, her pace matched not to the others, but to the land itself, a pace that neither outruns the cold nor invites it in. The wind rises for a moment and then falls again, brushing across the family like a long exhale, scattering fine crystals of snow across their path, tiny flakes catching briefly in the fur of hoods and on eyelashes before melting away. No one speaks. The silence is not empty, but full of shared breath, shared effort, shared memory. The land remains open around them, featureless to an unfamiliar eye, but full of meaning to theirs. The tilt of a drift here, the shape of a distant ridge there, the way the snow lies slightly deeper near the frozen stream they passed on the way out. These are the signs they follow, the landmarks that belong to them, not because they were placed there, but because they have been passed down, told through footsteps, shown in walks, remembered in bodies, rather than books. They walk steadily, not fast, not slow, just enough to stay warm without exhausting themselves, letting the motion become its own form of rest. The sled squeaks faintly as it moves, its wooden hide adjusting to the shifts in weight and terrain, and one of the dogs lets out a low breath that sounds almost like a sigh, but continues without pause. The world around them begins to blur slightly as the snow thickens, not into a storm, but into a soft veil that mutes all color and softens every shape, turning the camp in the distance into a hazy outline, still far, but no longer unseen. And when the grandmother glances up and sees the first familiar curve of the snowbank near the outer edge of their shelter, she does not call out, but smiles beneath her scarf, knowing that the walk is nearly done. Still, they do not rush. The return is as important as the departure, and the snow asks for no less respect in the end than it did at the start. So they continue forward, breath by breath, step by step, through the dimming light and the falling snow, wrapped in the soft silence of the land that has always known how to receive them back, as the familiar curves of the snowbanks and the gentle rise of the shelter's whalebone frame come fully into view through the thinning veil of snowfall. The family begins the final approach home, the soft crunch of boots deepening slightly as they step through the freshly laid snow that now covers the trail they had made earlier in the day. Their earlier footsteps completely erased, as though the land has drawn a curtain over the past, making room again for their return. The sled's runners glide more slowly now, the wood beneath creaking gently in places where the snow is wetter or packed unevenly, and the dogs begin to ease their pace, as if sensing that their part is nearly complete, their breaths heavier but even, their movements still calm, unhurried, and proud. No words are exchanged as they come upon the entrance of the shelter, the hide flap now lightly frosted along the seams, faint patterns of ice tracing tiny webs where warm air from inside once escaped and met the cold. The father steps forward first and pulls the flap open, his movements deliberate, careful not to let too much snow fall inward, and warm air, soft, barely warmer than the cold outside, but different in texture and scent, drifts toward them in a quiet cloud, carrying with it the familiar traces of oil, hide, and fire. One by one, they begin to enter, each pausing before the doorway to brush the snow from their outer layers, running hands over shoulders and sleeves, patting down the legs of trousers, shaking boots free of clinging powder. The mother helps the younger boy remove his hood, then lifts him gently by the elbow as he steps up into the threshold, and he murmurs a thank you, so faint it is more vibration than voice. Inside, the grandmother has already made her way to her usual place near the back wall, sitting on a folded fur, with her hands pressed to her knees, eyes half closed, her body slowly adjusting from cold to warmth, like a glacier melting one slow drop at a time. The boys remove their outer boots and line them up neatly beside the door, the older helping the younger, both of them tucking their mittens carefully into the sleeves of their coats, their movements as practiced as breathing. The dogs settle down near the outer wall of the shelter, curling into tight circles on the straw and fur bedding laid out for them, the sound of their breathing quickly syncing with the softer rhythm of the interior. The father begins unpacking the sled, untying the bindings with a slow hand, checking that each knot comes free without jerking, each fur still dry, each bundle accounted for. The mother prepares a place for the newly caught fish, unrolling a cool, flat piece of hide near the food storage area and gently laying the fish down in a single layer, her fingers brushing snow from their bodies before folding the hide back over them with care. The room begins to warm, not from a fire, but from the body heat of the family, from the absence of wind, from the gathering of breath and movement and quiet work. All of it shared in this intimate space where even stillness radiates comfort. The grandmother hums again, this time just a few notes, not a song, not even a tune, more like the echo of something remembered or a sound made to welcome the moment rather than mark it. The younger boy curls beside her soon after, resting his head on a pillow made from tightly packed moss, wrapped in cloth, blinking slowly as his body sinks into the warmth, the fur-lined interior gently cocooning him from the outside world. The older boy joins his mother, helping her sort through the remaining items from the sled, his fingers still a bit stiff, but steady. The father closes the flap gently, sealing the last of the cold air outside. The snow continues to fall just beyond the shelter's walls, pressing softly against the edges, its hush muffled now, barely heard through the thick layers of hide and snow-packed insulation. No one is in a rush. The work of the day is not done, but it has changed, become softer, quieter, more about closing than continuing. The family moves with the rhythm of unwinding, folding into rest, making room again in their bodies and their shelter for the long quiet of another night. And as the light outside fades completely into the steady twilight of Arctic evening, the home begins to glow with the warmth of presence alone. Not fire, not light, just people, resting, together, in peace. Now inside the shelter, the world, beyond its hide-lined walls, becoming only a softened memory of white and wind and snow that still falls quietly. Outside, the family begins the slow, peaceful drift into evening, not by declaration or change in tone, but by the natural lessening of movement, the lengthening of silence, and the quiet rhythm of familiar gestures, repeated with care and ease. The father sits on a low skin-covered bench near the back of the room, slowly unwinding one of the long straps used to secure the sled, inspecting it for frays or dampness with a level of focus that is more meditative than purposeful, his hands moving not from urgency, but because the feeling of sinew in his fingers helps him release the weight of the day. The mother kneels near the supply area, sorting through a set of dried meat bundles and checking their ties, counting with the faintest whisper of her breath as she touches each one, not because she fears shortage, but because the act itself brings calm and order, a small task that fits perfectly into the gentle quiet of this dimming hour. The children have retreated to their corner, huddled beneath a thick caribou hide, with only their faces showing, whispering not to converse, but to share the last soft bits of awareness before sleep claims them fully, their words half lost in the fur, drifting into the air like smoke that fades before it finds the ceiling. The grandmother, already wrapped tightly in her shawl and furs, sits upright near the center of the shelter, eyes half closed, her breath deep and slow, her expression unreadable but peaceful, her presence like a rooted tree in the center of the room, grounding everyone in the certainty that this moment is not new, but part of a long, unbroken line of evenings just like this one. A soft tapping comes from the mother's side as she uses the edge of a bone tool to knock loose a piece of ice from a cooking bowl left near the entrance, and then she pours in a small amount of warmed broth, setting it atop a flat, heated stone to coax the chill away before gently passing it toward the father. He nods once in thanks, but does not speak, taking the bowl in both hands and letting the warmth seep into his palms before sipping, the steam briefly fogging the space just before his face, then vanishing again into the surrounding air. The dogs, though outside now, have dug themselves deeper into the snow near the walls of the shelter, their movement barely audible, a shifting of limbs, a shake of fur, the muffled sigh of breath, but their closeness is felt, their curled bodies forming a circle of quiet guardianship just beyond the boundary of fur and bone. No fire burns inside, only the low glow of the seal oil lamp, its wick trimmed low, the flame flickering just enough to cast soft light against the wall behind it, creating the illusion of movement in the stretched hide. Shadows shifting like smoke in slow motion. No one looks at it directly, but all feel its presence, the warm center of the space, humming in silence. Occasionally, one of the boys stirs, adjusting the blanket over his legs or pulling his arms tighter beneath the fur, and the younger one murmurs something, a thought, a question, or perhaps the edge of a dream. But the sound fades before the words take shape. The mother has stopped moving now, sitting still with her hands folded in her lap, her back straight but relaxed, her eyes watching the quiet, not searching, not focused, but simply resting there. The father places the bowl back onto the stone, now nearly empty, and leans back slightly, not to sleep yet, but to begin letting go of the wakeful world, allowing his mind to empty itself of the snow, the sled, the ice, the lines, until only breath remains. Outside, the snow continues to fall, unchanged in its rhythm, its presence now as natural as air, drifting down upon the shelter in steady layers that will greet them in the morning. Inside, the silence grows a little thicker, a little warmer, a little more complete. The work of the day is done. The shelter holds. The snow whispers across the roof, and evening, in its fullest form, has arrived. Not loud, not proud, but gently, fully, and forever welcome. As the gentle light from the low-burning seal oil lamp continues to cast its flickering, golden glow against the hide-lined walls of the shelter, the family engages in the very last of the day's tasks, those small, necessary gestures that bring the body fully into stillness and allow the mind to begin its slow drift into rest, not with ceremony or rush, But with quiet repetition and care, the father takes a flat piece of smooth, worn bone from his kit, checking its edge, as he has done countless times before, and begins to scrape a hide near the entrance, his motions steady, methodical, and rhythmically slow, each movement accompanied by the soft rasp of bone against leather that fills the room with a gentle, repetitive sound, neither sharp nor dull, but somewhere in between, a comforting scrape that echoes just enough to settle the air. The hide, not large and already half prepared from previous days, does not require much attention, and his purpose is less about finishing and more about continuing the habit, keeping the cycle of care unbroken even on days that bring no urgency. Across the room, the mother finishes rolling up a set of cloths used earlier, folding each with precision and stacking them in a leather pouch, her fingers moving with a practiced ease that seems to require no thought at all, just the certainty of countless nights that have come before, each one ending with this same quiet tidying, the same comforting patterns. The older boy gently pours a few drops of melted fat into the flame of the lamp, feeding it with care, making sure the wick is properly upright and the light does not sputter, his face glowing faintly as he leans over it, eyes half closed in concentration, a small furrow of calm on his brow. He adjusts the dish beneath it slightly, ensuring no snow or stray moisture has pooled near its base, and then settles back down near the mother, resting one hand against the warm earth beneath the firestone. The younger child, already wrapped tightly in his sleeping furs, shifts only slightly, his breathing long and slow, eyelashes fluttering now and then as he teeters at the edge of dreams, his hand still tucked beneath his cheek, one boot dangling slightly from the blanket's edge. The grandmother leans forward just a bit to pat down one of the furs near the center of the shelter, smoothing it in long strokes, as though calming a restless thought. Her voice silent, but her gestures soothing, her presence like a warm stone at the heart of the room, anchoring without needing to move. The scraping continues for a little while, then stops. The father gently folds the hide and places it on a shelf of stacked materials along the wall, then wipes down the scraping bone with a clean cloth before wrapping it carefully in its pouch. He exhales a long, steady breath through his nose, the kind that feels like it pushes the rest of the day out from the lungs, and kneels for a moment with both hands on his thighs, staring into the flame with no particular focus. The dogs outside have fully stilled now, their breathing soft and undisturbed, snow gently covering their backs as they sleep in curled positions, nestled into the windbreak created by the side of the shelter. Inside, the silence deepens, not because sound has vanished, but because movement has slowed so completely that even small motions seem hushed, reduced to their barest elements. The mother extinguishes one small auxiliary lamp, letting the main seal oil flame carry the remaining light, dim and fluttering, its warmth extending just enough to paint long, stretching shadows onto the ceiling, making the hides overhead look like waves, frozen in mid-rise. The older boy now lies down, curling next to his brother, pulling a fur up to his chin, the edge of a yawn stretching across his face, before he blinks a final time and lets his eyes close. The father lowers himself onto his mat, lying flat with one arm tucked beneath his head, not yet asleep, but no longer awake in the full sense, his breath slowing, his body loosening into rest. The grandmother, last to lie down, adjusts the scarf over her eyes with one hand, then folds both arms across her chest in the way she always does, still, composed, and undisturbed. No one says goodnight, not because it is not felt, but because it is understood, built into the pattern of quiet closing, the slow, gentle sealing off of the day. Outside, the snow thickens just slightly, the air cooler now, but completely calm, a blanket of white, folding over the camp, the sky overhead a soft canvas of silver gray, unbroken, endless, and soft. Inside, nothing moves, but the flame and the breath and the final chores are done, with the final flickers of movement now faded into stillness, and the bodies of the family resting quietly beneath their layers of fur.